Most women would give anything to see a billionaire up close, even just for a second, in his tailored suit with the city at his feet. But Sophia never asked for that kind of life. She only wanted enough money to pay her tuition and a quiet place to read her books. But fate had other plans, and they started with a door she should never have opened. It was past midnight in the Blake Royal Tower, a luxury penthouse hotel stretching into the Manhattan sky, the kind of place where whispers were expensive and secrets came with velvet gloves. Sophia stood outside suite 4403, gripping her cleaning cart with both hands. Her schedule had changed last minute, and the housekeeping manager told her to check the top floor before clocking out. She was tired, her back aching from a double shift, but she didn't complain, not when every dollar counted. She knocked gently, no answer. She swiped the master key and stepped inside. The room was silent, dimly lit with floor-to-ceiling windows displaying the glowing skyline. She moved quietly, rolling the cart toward the marble bathroom which echoed softly with steam. She called out again, unsure anyone was there. "Hello, housekeeping?" Still nothing. She opened the bathroom door and froze. A wave of steam hit her, and through it she saw him, the man standing under the rainfall showerhead, water cascading down his sculpted back, muscles moving with every breath. His head was tilted slightly back, hair wet and pushed away from his forehead. His eyes closed in thought, and there was nothing but silence and water between them, until he opened his eyes and saw her. Sophia gasped, spinning around in panic, her heart slamming into her chest, her cheeks burned with shame, her voice caught in her throat. She tried to back out, mumbling an apology, but before she could escape, she heard his voice, low, amused, confident. "That's a $10 million view, and you just got it for free." She stopped dead, her eyes wide, her breath stuck somewhere between her lungs and her lips. It was the voice of a man used to being obeyed and admired, with a calmness that only power could teach. Still, she didn't dare turn back. She faced the wall, her hand gripping the doorframe, ready to run. "I didn't mean to," she stammered. "I thought the room was empty. I'm so sorry." Behind her she heard a soft chuckle, and then the sound of water turning off. A moment later, footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying the earth would swallow her whole. But instead of yelling or calling security, he said something that made her stomach twist. "Don't worry, you're not the first person to walk into my shower, but you might be the first to apologize instead of asking for a photo." She turned halfway, not sure what to expect, and saw him standing with a towel wrapped low around his waist, droplets of water tracing the lines of his chest. His expression was unreadable. One brow slightly raised, the corners of his mouth lifted in an amused smile. "I'm Julian Blake," he said calmly. "And you are Sophia," she said, barely audible, still stunned. "Well, Sophia, I think we're off to a very unusual start," he said, and walked past her toward the bedroom, leaving her standing in the mist and silence of a moment that felt like a dream, or maybe the beginning of something much more complicated. She didn't know yet, but what he did next would turn her world upside down and rewrite everything she thought she knew about love, class, and herself. Sophia Monroe was 21 years old, and every inch of her life had been shaped by restraint, responsibility, and the need to survive. She grew up in a small town in upstate New York, raised by her grandmother after her parents were killed in a car accident when she was 6. Books had been her refuge, her passport to worlds she couldn't afford to visit, and lives she never imagined she could live. Her dream was simple: get a nursing degree, work in pediatrics, and maybe one day open a small clinic for children who couldn't pay. That was all. No dreams of marble floors or skyline views, or men who walked out of steamy showers with perfect abs and sharp cheekbones. No fantasies of billionaires with silk towels and sharper words. Just a life of meaning, peace, and enough money to keep her lights on. That dream brought her to Manhattan, where she juggled night classes at City College, with a full-time job as a maid at Blake Royal Tower. The hotel wasn't just luxury, it was legend. Celebrities came and went without paparazzi ever catching a flash. Politicians met behind closed doors, and no one talked. And Julian Blake, the owner, was a mystery to everyone. People whispered about him in elevators and staff break rooms. The stories were always the same. He was brilliant, dangerous, and so rich he made other billionaires nervous, but no one ever saw him. Not really. Only the top managers had access to his private floors, until Sophia found herself standing in the steam of his shower suite, looking at the man behind the myth. Julian Blake had built his empire from a string of code and a lot of inherited money. But what made him feared and respected wasn't the money. It was what he did with it. After taking over his father's tech company at just 28, he turned it into a global titan. Then he moved into real estate, philanthropy, and elite hospitality. Now 33, he owned half the skyline and a mind that could break you with silence. And yet, beneath that ruthless brilliance, there was something else. Something no one could quite name. And Sophia was about to discover it firsthand. The morning after their awkward encounter, Sophia expected to be fired. She barely slept, staring at her cracked phone, wondering if security footage had already been sent to HR. She walked into the staff lobby, head down, trying to be invisible, but instead of a termination notice, she found an envelope with her name handwritten in elegant ink. Inside was a note, short and impossible to ignore. "Meet me at the rooftop cafe at noon, JB." Her hands shook as she read it again. She didn't know what was more shocking, that he remembered her name or that he wanted to see her again. She almost didn't go, but curiosity and a strange tug in her chest pulled her to the top floor, where the cafe overlooked the city like a quiet throne room. He was already there, sitting by the glass wall in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled, collar open, as if the world bent to him and never questioned why. She approached slowly, unsure if she should even sit, but he looked up and smiled. Not the amused smirk from the shower, but something quieter, gentler, like he was still trying to figure her out too. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "I wasn't sure you would." She nodded, unsure what to say. He poured her a glass of water and motioned for her to sit. "I owe you an apology. That wasn't exactly how I wanted us to meet." His voice had weight and warmth. She opened her mouth but said nothing. He continued, "I also need your help, and I think you might need mine." She blinked, confused. This wasn't what she expected, not a power play or a threat, but a proposition. "My family is flying in next week, and if I don't show them I'm in a stable, serious relationship, my mother will cut off the charitable fund I'm trying to protect," he said. "I have to convince them I'm ready to settle down, and I need someone to play the part of my fiancé. Just for a few months, you were there at the wrong time, which makes you the perfect choice." Sophia stared at him, stunned, her lips parted. "That's insane," she finally managed, but he shrugged. "Not if we both get what we want. You need money for school, for your future, and I need someone I can trust, someone who doesn't want anything from me except what's agreed. I can pay your tuition in full, plus something extra to help your grandmother, all legally, all clean, all professional." She looked at him, trying to read between the lines. There was no smirk now, no joke in his eyes, only intent. She should have walked away, said no, but part of her ached at the thought of her dream clinic, of her grandmother finally having heating in the winter, and maybe, just maybe, part of her wanted to see what came next. Sophia agreed with her voice, but her heart lagged behind, somewhere between disbelief and panic. The moment she shook his hand, something shifted in her world. Julian's fingers were warm and steady, his gaze unwavering, and yet she couldn't decide if he was a man rescuing her or a storm about to rearrange everything she thought she understood. Their arrangement began with silence. Contracts drawn by lawyers, signed at a glass desk in Julian's private office overlooking the skyline. He never once looked smug, never once reminded her of how awkwardly they'd met. Instead, he treated her like someone worth trusting, like a partner, which made the lie feel even heavier on her chest. The contract stated she'd move into his penthouse for 3 months, attend 2 family events, and act convincingly in love. Nothing physical required, but public displays were expected. Hand-holding, smiles, maybe a kiss, if cameras were around. Julian assured her it was standard for his world. But to her, every detail felt intimate, in a way she hadn't prepared for. Her first night in the penthouse felt like stepping onto another planet. The air was scented with cedar and expensive stillness. The ceilings were high, the floors warm under her bare feet. Her room was the size of her entire apartment back in Queens. Sunlight spilled across linen sheets, bookshelves lined one wall, and a single white orchid rested on the nightstand. She stood in the middle of the room, afraid to sit on anything, as if she'd ruin it just by breathing too loud. Julian knocked softly on her door that evening, holding 2 plates of food. "I wasn't sure if you liked steak or salmon, so I made both," he said with a crooked smile. She stared, blinking. "You cook?" He shrugged. "Sometimes it helps me think. Besides, I had to make sure you eat. Can't have my fake fiancé starving." They ate together in the open living room, city lights stretching behind them like a movie set. He asked about her classes, her grandmother, her dreams, not out of politeness, but with real interest, and she found herself relaxing, laughing even. Halfway through dinner she realized she hadn't touched her phone once, hadn't thought about cleaning schedules or overdue bills, just the warmth of the food, and the way he looked at her like nothing else mattered. He poured her a glass of wine, and she almost declined, but then remembered how tequila had led her to this moment, and smiled. Maybe wine could guide her a little further. The next morning began the real performance. They took photos in the garden balcony for his family's private PR announcement. A photographer Julian trusted arrived with coffee and soft jazz playing from a speaker. "Now hold her hand. Tilt your chin slightly. Look like you're falling in love," the photographer directed gently. Sophia tried to follow, but every time she glanced at Julian, his expression made her chest flutter. He wasn't pretending, or maybe he was just too good at it. His hand on her waist felt like heat, his eyes like a promise. After the shoot, he whispered, "Thank you," and brushed her hair from her face. Her heart skipped. She turned quickly, hiding the blush rising to her ears. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Breakfast was quiet, but always shared. She'd wake to find a fresh cup of coffee and a sticky note with a small message. Sometimes it was a joke, sometimes a quote. Once it just said, "Breathe." She saved every note in the drawer beside her bed, afraid to throw them away. During the day, he worked in his study while she finished online classes at the long dining table. Sometimes he'd pass by, drop a snack on her laptop, or ruffle her hair without a word. And every time he did something so small, her heart betrayed her a little more. At night, they often watched old films in the theater room. Sophia curled up with a blanket, Julian sitting a few inches away, but the space between them felt full of something unsaid. Once during a storm, the lights flickered and she startled. He shifted closer, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel the tension in her spine loosen. "You okay?" he whispered. "Yeah," she whispered back. But she wasn't, not really, because she was starting to wish this whole act wasn't an act. The first event arrived like a test she hadn't studied for. Julian's mother was hosting a charity gala in a glass ballroom overlooking Central Park. Sophia wore a midnight blue dress Julian had picked, the fabric soft against her skin, her hair swept up in loose curls. When she walked out of her room, Julian stared, not moving, not blinking. "You look," he began, but didn't finish. Instead, he stepped forward and offered his arm. They rode the elevator in silence, but it was thick with energy. Her fingers looped around his elbow, heart thudding like it might give her away. At the gala, Julian introduced her with a steady voice and proud eyes. "This is Sophia, my fiancée. I'm the lucky one," he said more than once. She smiled, nodded, tried not to tremble under the weight of eyes judging her worth. She didn't belong in their world, not with their polished conversations and diamond cufflinks, but Julian never left her side, his hand warm on her back, his words like shields. When an older woman scoffed at her simple gold earrings, Julian leaned in and said, "They belonged to her grandmother, who raised her. She's the strongest woman I know." The woman looked embarrassed. Sophia felt seen. Later that night, on the balcony where the music was quieter, she turned to him. "You didn't have to say all that." He looked at her. "I meant every word. You don't have to lie to make me feel better," she added softly. But he didn't answer. Instead, he reached up and touched her necklace, a small pendant shaped like a feather. "I'm not lying," he said finally, then walked away. She stood there alone, her heart racing, because part of her knew he wasn't acting anymore, and maybe she wasn't either. Things shifted after that night, not in words, but in gestures. He started waiting for her after class, driving her home even when she insisted she could take the subway. He began asking more questions, listening more deeply, remembering details she hadn't realized she shared, like the way she loved sunflowers, or how she used to hum while folding towels at the hotel. And she began noticing him too, how he cracked his knuckles when anxious, how he spoke to his staff with quiet respect, how he looked exhausted sometimes but never complained. One evening they visited the construction site for a children's hospital. His mother's foundation was funding. He took her hand as they walked through the half-built halls. "Someday, this place will save lives," he said. She smiled. "Maybe I'll work here. Maybe you'll run it," he added. She looked at him, unsure if he was joking, but his expression was soft and full of something she didn't dare name yet. As weeks passed, the line between pretending and feeling blurred so much it vanished entirely. One night after fundraising dinner, she caught him staring at her while she removed her earrings in their shared penthouse. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. He stepped closer. "Nothing. Just wondering if this is still pretend for you." Her hands froze. She looked at him, unsure how to answer. He moved even closer, so close she could smell the cedar in his shirt. His fingers brushed her cheek. "You've been shaking up my world from the moment you walked into that shower," he said. Her breath caught, and in that moment, she knew she was already his, even if she hadn't said it yet. Sophia had always believed that people who came from different worlds could never truly understand each other. Not really. Not when every instinct told her she didn't belong in his, yet somehow the way Julian looked at her made her question everything. It was in the small moments, like when he reached for her hand without thinking, or the way his voice softened when he said her name. She told herself it was still a role, a script they both agreed to, but each day made that lie harder to hold on to. Still, there was a part of her that feared what might happen if she let herself believe too much, because love, real love, always had a cost, and she had nothing left to gamble. One rainy afternoon, as the penthouse windows blurred with silver light, Sophia walked into the study, hoping to return a book she had borrowed. She found Julian standing by his desk, phone pressed to his ear, his tone clipped and cold. "I said no, not this quarter. Delay the announcement. My priorities have shifted." He ended the call with a sharp tap, and when he turned and saw her, something unreadable flickered in his eyes. She hesitated at the door. "Sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop." He ran a hand through his hair and let out a breath. "It's okay. This place echoes more than I realize." She placed the book on the table, but curiosity tugged at her. "Everything all right?" she asked carefully. Julian hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Sort of. There's just pressure from the board about an acquisition. But, honestly, I've been thinking about walking away." She blinked, surprised. "From the company?" He shrugged. "Not entirely, just from the version of myself they expect me to be, the one who never says no, never feels anything." Sophia watched him, sensing the weariness he tried to hide. "You don't have to be who they say you are. You're already more than enough." He looked at her then. Really looked, like he saw something in her no one else had offered him before, something that didn't come with strings or agendas. Later that night, she found a dusty envelope slipped beneath her bedroom door. Inside was an old photo, a young boy standing between two stone buildings, eyes full of longing and hands gripping a rusted bicycle. On the back, in faded ink, was scribbled "Julian, age 10, before the scholarship." She stared at it, her fingers trembling slightly. She'd never known much about his past. He didn't speak of it often, only hinted at hardships buried under the weight of his present. The next morning, over breakfast, she placed the photo on the counter and met his eyes. "Why did you leave this for me?" He paused. "Because I wanted you to know that before I had billions and boardrooms, I was just a kid from nowhere, with a dream that someone would see me." Sophia swallowed hard, the photo suddenly heavier in her hands. "I see you, Julian, not the name or the suits. Just you." He looked away, but not before she saw the emotion he fought to hide. In the days that followed, they grew even closer, the barriers thinning like morning fog. She told him about her father leaving when she was 4, about her mother's breakdown and the nights she used to fall asleep next to hospital machines, just to stay close to her grandmother. He listened without judgment, never interrupting, just holding space for her pain. He said little in response, only that her strength both humbled and terrified him, because it made him want to be someone worthy of standing beside her. It was the kind of vulnerability she never expected from him. The kind that made her want to hold him, not as a billionaire, but as a man. Then came the night of the Blake family estate dinner, an annual event that Sophia had never planned to attend, but now was expected to attend as Julian's fiancée. The estate was a grand thing, sprawling lawns and cold marble, chandeliers hanging like frozen waterfalls. She wore a deep red dress that hugged her frame, just enough to make her feel exposed but powerful. Julian stood beside her in a dark suit, hand resting gently at the small of her back as they entered the lion's den of whispered judgments and careful smiles. The evening unfolded slowly, champagne and small talk laced with subtle tests, yet Julian never let go of her, his thumb tracing light circles against her side whenever someone said something sharp. When his cousin leaned in and said, "Is this the newest one?" Julian's smile faded, and he said, "No, she's the only one." But it wasn't until after dinner that things changed. They were seated in the library when his father, Richard Blake, an aging tycoon with a voice like polished ice, pulled Julian aside. "I thought we agreed you'd marry someone from the Crestline family, not the help." Julian tensed, but didn't flinch. "I didn't agree to anything, father, and she's more than you'll ever deserve to know." Sophia heard it all, standing just outside the doorway, her heart cracked open, not because of the insult, but because of how Julian defended her without hesitation, without shame. They left early, walking through the estate gardens in silence, moonlight casting pale shadows between hedges when he finally spoke. His voice was low. "I'm sorry you heard that." She looked at him, and for the first time saw not just a man trying to protect her, but a man fighting battles deeper than she could reach. "You can't choose where you come from," she said gently, "but you can choose who you fight for." He turned to her, hands sliding into his pockets. "I'm fighting for you, Sophia, and not because of this contract or the board or my family, but because somewhere between all the pretending, I forgot where the line was." She stepped closer, her heart racing. "And what about now?" He shook his head. "I don't see a line anymore. Just you." That night, back in the penthouse, neither of them slept. They sat in the kitchen drinking tea, words spilling between sips, truths and confessions unraveling like threads they didn't know they'd been holding. He told her about the engagement his family had tried to arrange, how it felt like being sold, how he never wanted to become a man who measured his worth by status. She told him about her scholarship applications, how she feared getting in because it meant leaving behind the people she had just started to care about. They sat in the quiet, shoulders brushing, souls exposed, and in that silence, she realized she wasn't afraid of falling anymore, only of what it would mean to let herself hope. The next morning, Julian made a choice. He walked into a board meeting with 10 shareholders and said he was stepping back for 6 months, that he was prioritizing the foundation's hospital project and would let the interim team manage profits. The room erupted in chaos, but he didn't care. Later, he told Sophia, "I've spent years chasing things that made me look powerful, but never once did I feel whole until you walked in that day and screamed like you saw a ghost in my shower." She laughed through her tears and whispered, "You did look terrifying." He leaned in, forehead resting against hers. "I want to be a man who builds something real. Not just buildings and buyouts, but something with you." Sophia didn't respond right away. Her hands trembled, but when she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I want that too, even if I'm scared." He smiled. "Good. Then we'll be scared together." It was supposed to be just another evening in the penthouse, calm and predictable, like the soft hum of a city settling in for the night. But something about the air felt too still, too fragile. Like the moment before a storm crashes through open windows, Julian stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his collar loose, eyes distant as the city lights shimmered far below. Sophia watched him from the kitchen counter, her fingers curled around a mug of tea she hadn't sipped. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her chest before he even said a word. "I need to tell you something." His voice was low, too quiet for a room that large. She set her mug down slowly, her heart already beginning to race. Julian turned to face her, his jaw tense, the weight in his eyes deeper than anything she had seen before. "I never wanted to lie to you." "Not really." She stayed silent, bracing herself. The contract was real, but it wasn't just the board or my father pushing it. I needed it, not just to protect the company, but to protect myself. "From what?" she asked, her voice steady though her hands had started to tremble. "From wanting more," he replied simply, "because if it had started without rules, I don't think I would have ever been able to let you go." She felt the words strike something soft inside her, and yet he looked like a man confessing a crime. "There's more," he added. I never told you why this fake engagement had to happen so urgently." She nodded slowly. A part of her had always sensed there was something he wasn't saying. "My family has a legacy clause in our charter. On my birthday, if I'm not married or officially engaged, the power of attorney transfers to a trust that my father controls." Sophia blinked, stunned. "So you really were at risk of losing everything?" "Not everything," he said with a faint smile. "Just the part of my life I built for myself. The company, the foundation, my independence." And then he looked at her and said the one thing she didn't expect. "But none of that scared me as much as what I started feeling for you." She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "You don't have to say anything," Julian said. "I just needed you to know, because I think I crossed the line between pretending and wanting somewhere along the way, and I don't know how to come back from that." Sophia took a step closer, her voice quiet but firm. "Maybe you're not supposed to come back. Maybe that line was always meant to disappear." He exhaled slowly, a flicker of hope in his eyes, but before either of them could say anything more, Julian's phone lit up on the counter, buzzing urgently. He picked it up, frowning, then answered, his voice shifting instantly into business. "Yes, what? No, that's not possible. I secured those rights months ago." Sophia watched his face change, the calm replaced with tension. He ended the call with a hard sigh and turned to her. "That was my lawyer. The Crestline Group filed an injunction claiming our engagement is a sham. They're demanding an investigation. If they prove the relationship's fake, the clause triggers and everything goes to my father." Sophia felt her stomach sink. "What do we do?" "We make it real," he said without missing a beat, and she stared at him, stunned. Julian moved closer, his voice urgent but soft. "Marry me, for real. No contract, no exit clause, no timeline, just you and me." Sophia stepped back, overwhelmed. "You can't just ask me that because your company's at risk. I'm asking because I don't want to lose you," he said. "Because when I imagine my life 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I can't see it without you in it." She swallowed hard, torn between her heart and the fear pressing against her ribs. "I need time." He nodded. "But they don't care about your time. The board wants proof. By the gala, in 3 days. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling of the guest room that no longer felt unfamiliar, memories of their laughter echoing like soft ghosts, every kind touch, every unexpected glance. It had never felt fake, not even once, but fear had a way of rewriting truths, of making the heart question what the soul already knew. As dawn approached, she slipped out of bed and walked barefoot into the kitchen. Julian was already there, leaning against the counter, coffee steaming in his hand. Neither of them spoke for a moment, the quiet between them fuller than words. He broke the silence. "I never thought I'd be the one afraid to lose something real. But here I am, and you walked into my life by accident and somehow gave it meaning." She looked at him, her voice raw. "And if I say yes, what then? You get the company, your independence. What do I get?" Julian took a step forward. "Everything. You get everything. My time, my trust, my love." Sophia searched his face, desperate for any crack in the promise, and when she found none, she let out a shaky breath. "I want to believe you. I want to believe that I'm not just part of your strategy." He reached for her hand, placing it over his heart. "Feel that? That's not strategy. It's the only real thing I've ever had." 2 days later, the gala arrived. Like a tidal wave, the city glittered in anticipation. Paparazzi swarmed the entrance of the venue, flashbulbs exploding like fireflies. Sophia stood in front of the mirror, her dress a midnight blue that shimmered with every breath she took. Julian entered the room, his eyes locking on hers like the world had narrowed to that single moment. "You look like the future," he said softly, and for the first time, she didn't shrink under his gaze. She stepped toward him and said, "Then let's walk into it together." They arrived arm in arm, the perfect couple under the perfect lights, but inside, the pressure mounted, whispers floated like smoke, critics ready to tear their story apart. Julian stepped up to the microphone, his voice calm but commanding. "For years I've let fear guide my choices. Fear of failure, fear of not living up to a legacy, fear of being seen as something less than perfect. But then I met her, And for the first time, I didn't care what anyone thought, because she made me want to be someone better. Not for the cameras, not for the board, but for her. Sophia watched him, her heart breaking and healing all at once. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. The crowd gasped, but Sophia stood frozen. Julian turned to her, his voice unshaking. This isn't about a contract, or saving face, or proving anything to anyone. This is about you and me and the life I want to build with you. Will you marry me right now, here, not for them, but for us? She looked around. The eyes, the cameras, the expectations. Then back at the man who had stripped down every wall she had ever built. She nodded slowly, then whispered, "Yes, but only if you promise to keep making tea at 2 a.m. The room erupted in applause, not because of the spectacle, but because in that moment, something undeniably genuine had broken through the surface of power and wealth and fear. A love that had started with a mistake, but bloomed into something unstoppable. As the music swelled and Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, Sophia knew she hadn't just walked into the wrong shower that day. She had walked into the beginning of everything. They said fairy tales only lived in books and movies, stories where love overcame status and pain melted under the weight of truth. But for Sophia, the fairy tale had just taken a sharp turn. It was 2 days after the gala, the air still thick with the scent of roses and champagne. But something had shifted, not between her and Julian, but around them. Like the world had decided to test what they thought was already solid. It started with a phone call. Julian had just stepped into the study when Sarah, his executive assistant, appeared at the door, her face unreadable. "The investors want a meeting," she said, tight-lipped. "They're requesting proof that the marriage isn't just a show for the board." Sophia, who had been walking past the room, paused in her tracks. Julian looked at Sarah, his jaw tensing. They already saw the proposal, the gala. What more do they want? They want your marriage license, a signed affidavit, and proof of cohabitation for at least 6 months, Sarah replied, her voice low. Sophia stepped into the room slowly, her voice soft but certain. "That means we have to move in together, actually live like husband and wife." He looked at her, his eyes clouded. "This isn't what I wanted you to be dragged into." "But Sophia..." She just nodded. "I already knew the moment I said yes that I wasn't marrying a man. I was marrying a legacy." She gave a faint smile, one tinged with bravery and quiet heartbreak. "Let's show them how real it can be." The next day, she officially moved into the master bedroom, though it wasn't the room that made her nervous. It was the invisible expectations tied to it. The air between them shifted again, not distant, but cautious, like two hearts waiting to see which would leap first. At night, they talked in whispers beneath the city lights, about childhoods they had buried, fears they never shared. Sophia learned that Julian once cried in a boarding school dorm because no one called on his birthday. Julian discovered that Sophia still dreamt of a bakery she never opened, a dream shelved under unpaid bills and broken family promises. These were not the conversations of a fake couple. These were soul-deep exchanges. And yet both of them kept tiptoeing around the one thing that scared them more than exposure confession. Then came the message, anonymous and brutal. Sophia found it slipped under the penthouse door in an unmarked envelope. Inside were photographs, grainy images of her entering Julian's shower that very first day, and a typed note beneath them. "Gold digger or genius. Either way, the board is watching." Her hands trembled as she looked at the images, remembering the sheer embarrassment of that moment, a moment that had started it all. She left the envelope on Julian's desk without a word and retreated to the balcony. When he found her there, her back to him, wind tugging at her robe, he picked up the note and felt something cold settle in his gut. "You think I care what they say?" he asked, voice hard but laced with pain. She turned to him, her eyes shining. "I don't care that they're watching, Julian. I care that we still haven't said the one thing that would make all of this real." He froze, then stepped closer, their faces inches apart. "Say it," she whispered, voice almost breaking. "Tell me this is more than strategy. Tell me I'm not just your way out." Julian looked at her for a long time, his hands aching to touch her, but his fear louder. "I thought I could control this," he said. I thought I could build a story so perfect, no one would question it. But then you started making tea at night and humming while you folded towels, and you started filling every room with your laugh, and suddenly I couldn't breathe without you in the room. Sophia blinked, her heart a mix of joy and sorrow. And yet, you still didn't say it. Julian reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. I love you, Sophia Hart. And I think I've loved you since the moment you ran out of my bathroom, red-faced and angry. The words hit her like a wave, and in that moment, she realized how deeply she had needed to hear them. I love you too, she whispered, even though you're infuriating and stubborn, and your closet is bigger than my entire apartment. He laughed, pulling her into his arms. Then don't ever leave, he said into her hair, not unless I'm coming with you. But just as the moment began to settle like soft dust, Sarah entered the room with a grave expression. There's been a leak, she said. Someone gave the board that envelope too. Julian's arms tightened around Sophia, who looked up at him, terrified. What does that mean? It means they're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow, Sarah said. They want to vote to strip your authority until they can verify the marriage's legitimacy in court. Sophia felt the warmth drain from her body. I've become your liability, haven't I? She whispered. Julian turned to her, his voice sharp. You are not a liability. You are the only thing in my life that's actually real, and I won't let them take that away. The next morning, as they entered the boardroom hand in hand, the atmosphere was icy. The directors sat with arms crossed, briefcases snapped open, as if ready for war. Julian stood tall, his voice steady. I know some of you believe this relationship is fabricated, but if you think I'd risk everything I've built for a lie, then you never really understood what this company means to me. The chairman leaned forward. This is about legacy, Julian, and sometimes love is the most convenient excuse for losing control. Sophia stepped forward, surprising everyone, including Julian. Love doesn't make you lose control, she said. It teaches you how to hold on when everything else tells you to let go. She reached into her bag and pulled out the bakery blueprint she had once designed. This is what I gave up, my dream, so that I could be a part of his world, not because I needed saving, but because I believed in something more than class and contracts. I believed in what we were building, not just the illusion, but the foundation. Julian looked at her with awe, like he was seeing her for the first time all over again. The board voted to delay the decision, giving Julian 30 days to prove the authenticity of their marriage in front of a legal mediator. It was a reprieve, not a win, but they walked out of that room more united than ever. In the elevator, Julian turned to her and said, I've never been prouder of anyone than I was of you in there. Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, Now let's build a life that no one can question. And as the elevator doors opened to the penthouse, a faint golden sunrise stretched across the horizon, casting light on two people who had weathered the storm and were still standing. 30 days later, the penthouse no longer felt like borrowed luxury or unfamiliar territory. It had become home, not because of the view or the glass walls or the designer furniture, but because of the way Sophia laughed when she cooked, the way Julian left his coffee cup next to hers every morning, the way their routines folded into each other like pages in the same book. The legal mediator arrived on a Thursday morning, expecting a tense, formal declaration of love, but what he witnessed was different. It was quiet, natural, the way Julian reached to tuck a strand of hair behind Sophia's ear as she nervously smoothed her dress, the way she smiled up at him with trust that could not be scripted. They gave their testimony side by side, not reciting rehearsed lines, but recounting the awkward shower incident, the first fake dinner, the first real kiss, the argument about kitchen tiles, and the moment Julian had said, I love you, with a tremble in his voice that betrayed how much he meant it. The mediator closed his file, removed his glasses, and simply nodded. This is as real as it gets, he said, and with that, the final piece fell into place. Later that evening, they stood on the balcony, city lights below like a sea of stars, and Sophia leaned into Julian's side, her head resting gently on his shoulder. I used to think I was invisible, she murmured, just another maid cleaning up someone else's world, and now look at me, not because you gave me this view, but because you saw me before I even saw myself. Julian kissed her temple, a slow, reverent touch. I didn't give you anything you didn't already have. I just reminded you, you were worth being seen. They didn't throw a party, or post pictures, or announce anything to the world. Love didn't need fireworks or headlines. It just needed quiet promises, upheld every day. Sophia eventually opened her bakery in a cozy corner of the city. She called it Second Chances, and the ribbon-cutting ceremony was quiet and full of laughter. Julian showed up late, flower on his tie and a bouquet in hand, and when she saw him standing there with pride in his eyes and warmth in his smile, she knew this was it. Not the penthouse or the deals or the scandal, but this moment, surrounded by the scent of cinnamon and new beginnings. People still whispered about them, about how it all began with a shower and a mistaken entrance. But what they didn't see was everything that came after the midnight talks, the shared griefs, the bakery walls painted by their own hands, the love that didn't care where they came from, only where they were going. And as Julian wrapped his arm around Sophia in front of her bakery's glass window, watching the sun reflect off the golden open sign, he said, "Remember when I told you not to run away from me?" She nodded, eyes soft. "You were worth running to, Julian, always." And in that moment, with no boardroom to impress, no cameras to pose for, just flower-dusted jeans and love-stained memories, they both knew they had rewritten the narrative, not of a billionaire saving a maid, but of two people saving each other. Because love is not measured in money or marble floors, it is measured in growth, in gentleness, in the courage to believe that someone sees all of you and chooses you anyway.